Today we're going to be going over the crowding out effect. The theory of crowding out basically is this idea when government increases its spending, it will increase the demand for goods and services, which can lead to higher interest rates and higher inflation. That's why a lot of politicians, a lot of people in politics, specifically in the US, Republicans and conservatives, want to reduce government spending to reduce inflation and interest rates. But then Democrats say that we can basically handle it, we can control and regulate it. So crowding out is basically the idea that government, when they increase spending, it leads to higher inflation. But how specifically does that happen? Well, first, the government increases its spending, which means it needs to borrow more money. Remember, when the government increases its spending, that typically means that we're increasing the deficit or decreasing the current surplus. Because of that, it generally means we're going to have to borrow more. So how does the government borrow? They borrow by selling bonds. This is like your open market operations. When you sell bonds, that raises the demand for loanable funds. Because of that, and because of the higher demand for loanable funds, that leads to higher interest rates. And higher interest rates lead to less investment, and higher interest rates are a combination that leads to higher inflation. So it's a huge process. You don't really need to know all of this. Just realize government spending leads to higher deficit spending. Higher deficit spending leads to more loanable funds, higher interest rates, and then higher interest rates lead to inflation. So let's go to two different questions. Pause the video, try to solve these. Let's go to number one. If the government increases deficit spending during a period of full employment, which of the following is most likely to occur in the loanable funds market? So let's go through these. The demand for loanable funds decreases, leading to lower interest rates. Well, that's not necessarily true. Remember, crowding out, higher deficit spending leads to higher loanable fund demand. So A is not right. B isn't right because we're not talking about the supply of loanable funds, we're talking about the demand. C, the demand for loanable funds increases, raising interest rates and reducing private investment. That is correct. D, the supply of loanable funds decreases. That's not correct. So C. And you can notice here that questions regarding crowding out generally don't actually mention crowding out in the question. You gotta kind of realize that it's talking about crowding out effect. You gotta realize, hey, government spending leads to more inflation because it increases the demand for loanable funds. You have to basically be able to apply it in any sort of context. Now let's go to number two. Which of the following best explains why increased government borrowing might lead to lower levels of private investment? Higher government borrowing reduces taxes? No, that's not true. Government borrowing increases aggregate supply, leading to inflation. A higher aggregate supply actually doesn't lead to inflation, so that's just wrong. C, government borrowing increases interest rates, making private borrowing more expensive. That is correct, so C would be our answer here. And then D, private investors are required to lend directly to the government instead of private firms. That is incorrect. So our answer here is C. But what you can notice in these two questions, and what you might see on the AP exam, is that most questions regarding crowding out effect don't actually mention it. You're going to have to apply it in certain contexts, specifically regarding government spending and inflation, interest rates, and deficit spending. All you need to understand is basically this process, and you can get any question right, and you've basically understood the crowding out effect.